My name is Leila Hassan. I am 29 years old. And I want to tell you about the 11 months my mother used my business account as her own personal expense account while I was living on the other side of the world, and about the Thursday afternoon I sat at my kitchen table with every bank statement printed out in front of me and understood, for the first time, and all at once, what had actually been happening. I want to tell you the whole thing. Not just the part with the statements and the CPA, and the report filed at 6:03 p.m. on a Thursday. The whole thing from the beginning, because these situations never begin where they appear to begin. They begin much earlier, in smaller decisions and quieter dynamics, in the particular way a family teaches one of its members that her resources are a collective matter and her boundaries are a negotiation. I grew up the middle daughter of three. My older sister Rima is 5 years ahead of me, settled and practical, married at 26 to a man my parents approved of immediately and completely. My younger sister Dina is 3 years behind me, the kind of person who has always been described by my mother as sensitive, which in our family was a word that meant requiring a different quality of care, softer handling, more patience, more financial attitude. I was neither the eldest nor the sensitive one. I was the capable one, the one who figured things out, the one who, from about the age of 16, my mother called when something needed to be solved. I do not say this bitterly. For a long time I wore it as something close to pride. Being capable felt like being valued. I understand now that these are not the same thing, and that the gap between them is exactly the space my mother learned to operate in. I started my business at 24. I had been working for 3 years in digital marketing at an agency, learning everything I could learn in that environment, and by the time I was 23, I had identified a niche in content strategy for mid-size e-commerce brands that I was confident I could serve independently. I spent 8 months building a client base on the side before I handed in my notice, which was the most frightening thing I had done up to that point in my life, and also the clearest. I registered the LLC in March of that year. By the end of my first 12 months as a sole operator, I was earning more than I had at the agency and working with 6 clients whose contracts renewed without prompting. My mother had opinions about this. She had opinions about most things, but she had particular opinions about the business because it was visible and growing and therefore available for commentary in a way that my inner life was not. She told people about it at family gatherings in the way she had previously told people about my older sister Rima's marriage, with a particular proprietary warmth, as though the achievement reflected something about her own choices and not exclusively mine. She called me her entrepreneur daughter. She sent me articles about small business management that I had already read 2 years earlier. She asked questions about my clients that I answered carefully and partially because I had learned from the first year that full transparency about income invited a specific kind of conversation I was not prepared to have every month. By the time I was 26, my LLC was bringing in $187,400 annually. I had 8 clients, 2 part-time contractors I hired on a project basis, and a business bank account at a credit union that I managed with the kind of attention I gave to very few other things in my life. Every transaction was categorized. Every invoice was logged. Every expense had a corresponding receipt in a folder on my laptop sorted by month and vendor. I was not a person who did not check her statements. I want you to understand that about me before I tell you the rest. The overseas contract came in November of that year. A digital marketing agency based in a city I had never visited wanted a 6-month content strategy engagement, remote work, primarily, but with an expectation that I would be present in their offices for approximately 3 weeks each month. The contract value was $94,500 for 6 months. It was the largest single engagement I had signed, and it would require me to be genuinely, substantially elsewhere for half a year. I spent 2 weeks thinking about the logistics before I said yes. The practical problem was the LLC account. I had a handful of ongoing smaller client retainers that continued during the overseas engagement, and those clients paid directly into the business account on monthly cycles. I also had 2 quarterly vendor invoices that needed to be paid from that account during the 6 months I would be away, my accounting software subscription, and a licensing fee for a design tool my contractors used. The amounts were not large, $847 and $1,240 respectively, due in January and April. But they needed to be paid on time, or the subscriptions would lapse and my contractors would lose access mid-project. I had two options. I could set up automated payments for both and restrict the account to no additional transactions. Or I could give a trusted person limited signatory access to handle the two payments in case anything went wrong with the automation, a payment bouncing, a billing address needing to be updated, something requiring a human decision that I might be 12 time zones away and asleep for. I gave my mother the access. I want to be precise about what I gave her because the precision matters. I added her as a limited signatory on one account, the operating account, not the savings account where I kept the business reserve fund. I gave her a written instruction document, typed and printed, that I left on her kitchen counter the Sunday before I flew out. The document was 1 page. It said, 2 payments will be due from this account during the next 6 months. The first is $847 to a software vendor, due January 15th. The second is $1,240 to a licensing vendor, due April 3rd. If either payment fails to process automatically, use the attached card to complete the payment manually. Do not use this account for any other purpose. I will review all statements when I return. She said she understood. She said it was straightforward. She hugged me goodbye at the airport on a Tuesday morning in early November and told me she was proud of me and said to call when I landed. I called when I landed. Everything was fine. It stayed fine, as far as I knew, for 11 months. I want to tell you about that period, the overseas months and the months after I came back and before I looked at the statements, because the story is not only what my mother did. The story is also what I did not do, and understanding that is important. I was busy in a way I had not been busy before. The engagement was demanding and the time difference was significant, and my social life in a new city, threadbare at first and gradually richer, absorbed whatever hours the work did not. I renewed the overseas contract for a second 6 months in April, which I had not originally planned to do, but which felt right at the time. The work was good, the city had become familiar, and I was, for the first time in several years, genuinely enjoying the experience of being somewhere completely new. During those 11 months, I did not look at the LLC operating account statements. I had set up the automated payments and I trusted they had processed, and I told myself I would do a full reconciliation when I returned and settled back in. This was not my usual practice. My usual practice was monthly review. Every first weekend of the month, statements open on one side of the screen and my accounting software on the other. But I was overseas and I was busy and the account felt handled, and I let it slide. I came back in October. I spent the first 2 weeks readjusting time zones, routines, the particular quietness of my apartment after 11 months of a different city's ambient sound. I had dinner with my mother the first Sunday I was back. She made a large meal and asked about the work and the city and whether I had met anyone interesting, and she seemed in good spirits, warm and easy in the way she was when things were going well for her. I noticed this, the ease of her, and I attributed it to the normal pleasure of having her daughter home. I did not look at the statements that first week back or the second. I was settling. I looked at them on a Saturday morning in late October, at my kitchen table with coffee, the way I always did. I opened the account portal at 9:22 a.m. I expected to find the 2 vendor payments, perhaps some minor transaction I had forgotten authorizing before I left, and 11 months of clean inactivity. I found 37 transactions I did not recognize. I looked at the screen for a long time. I did not move. The coffee was getting cold, and I did not notice. I looked at the transaction list and I read each entry from the top. A grocery store on November 14th, $214.33. A pharmacy on November 19th, $67.80. A utility company on December 3rd, $183.50. A grocery store again on December 11th, $196.70. A clothing retailer on December 22nd, $341.20. They continued through September. 37 entries. Groceries, pharmacies, utility bills, a gym membership, a streaming service, a restaurant I did not recognize, a clothing purchase I had not made, a home goods store I had not visited. Every transaction had been made with the business account card that I'd left with my mother for 2 specific vendor payments. The 2 vendor payments were also there, processed correctly on their due dates. Around them, 35 additional transactions that had nothing to do with my business and everything to do with my mother's household expenses. I sat at that table until 11:47 a.m. I did not call her. I did not call anyone. I opened a spreadsheet, and I began entering every unauthorized transaction by date, amount, and vendor category. It took me 45 minutes. When I finished, the total at the bottom of the column read $31,450.17. Something inside me went completely still. Not cold. Not furious. Still, the way a room goes still when you understand that the silence you have been sitting in was not emptiness, but concealment. I closed the laptop, and I went for a walk. It was a gray October morning, and the neighborhood was quiet, and I walked for 40 minutes without direction, just movement, the physical fact of being in my own body in my own city, doing the simplest possible thing. I thought about the instruction document I had left on her kitchen counter. I thought about the specific language. Do not use this account for any other purpose. I thought about the Sunday dinner 2 weeks earlier, her ease, her warmth, the meal she had made. I thought about whether any of that ease had been the ease of relief, of having hoped I would not look too carefully and finding herself, for the moment, right. I went home and I called my CPA. Her name is Farida Osei. She has handled my business accounts since the second year of the LLC, and she is the kind of professional who never sounds alarmed, which is a quality I have always found useful in a financial advisor, and found especially useful on that Saturday afternoon when I called her at 1:15 p.m. and explained what I had found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Had I authorized any of the transactions verbally? Had my mother been compensated in any formal way for managing the account during my absence? And had any of the expenses been business-related in any category? I said no to all 3. She said she needed to see the full statement and the original signatory agreement I had created. I photographed the instruction document and emailed it to her at 1:43 p.m. along with the 12 months of statements I had downloaded. She said she would look at everything over the weekend and call me Monday morning. She called me at 8:34 a.m. on Monday. She said she had reviewed every transaction and cross-referenced them against my filed business expenses for the relevant tax year. None of the 35 unauthorized transactions had been declared as business expenses, which meant the account had been used as a personal expense account without any of the tax implications being addressed. She said this created 2 problems. The first was straightforward misappropriation, use of business funds without authorization. The second was more complicated. Because the transactions had passed through a business account and had not been reported, their nature created a potential tax discrepancy that the IRS could characterize as improper use of a business entity for personal benefit. This was her professional obligation to flag. She said, "I want to be clear about what I'm telling you. I'm not saying charges will be filed. I'm saying the situation as it stands has legal exposure that you need to address before your next filing. You need an attorney, not just me." I said I understood. I asked her to prepare a full summary document, every unauthorized transaction, the total, the tax year implications, and to send it to me by end of day. It arrived at 4:51 p.m. 11 pages. Every transaction listed with date, amount, vendor, and category. A summary paragraph at the end explaining the tax exposure in plain language. A note at the bottom that said, "This document has been prepared for the purposes of legal consultation and should be shared with your attorney at the earliest opportunity." I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Sana Mirza. She handles small business matters and civil disputes, and I had used her once before for a contract review. I reached her assistant at 9:07 a.m. on Tuesday and had an appointment for Thursday at 2 p.m. I did not call my mother between the Saturday I found the statements and the Thursday of the attorney appointment. This was a deliberate choice. I had things I wanted to say, and I did not trust myself to say them at the right time in the right way, and more than that, I wanted to understand the full shape of what had happened before I had any conversation that could be characterized later as emotional or reactive. I wanted the documents in my hand. I wanted to know exactly what I was holding before I held it up. My mother called me on Tuesday evening at 7:18 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:34 p.m. The voicemail she left said she was calling to check in, that she hoped I was settling back and well, that she had made extra food and wondered if I wanted to come for dinner on the weekend. Her voice in the message was ordinary.
Warm.
Entirely ordinary. I saved the voicemail, and I made dinner, and I went to bed at 10:30 p.m., and I lay in the dark for a while thinking about the instruction document on her kitchen counter, and the 35 transactions, and the 11 months, and the warmth in her voice on the phone, and I thought about the particular kind of courage it takes to behave normally when you are waiting to find out whether you have been caught. Sanaa Mirz's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view I noticed, and then stopped noticing. I sat across from her at 2 p.m. on Thursday with Farida's 11-page summary document and my own printed copy of the statements and the photographed instruction document, and I laid them out in order on the conference table the way you lay out evidence, which is what they were. Sanaa read everything, without speaking for 12 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "Walk me through the signatory arrangement in your own words." I did. I described the instruction document, the specific limitation I had set, the 2 authorized transactions, the account access I had granted, and its stated purpose. I described coming home, the delay before reviewing the statements, what I found when I did. She said, "And she has not contacted you about this since you returned?" I said she had called twice in the last 2 days and left one voicemail asking me to dinner. Sanaa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The good news is that your documentation is unusually clean. The instruction document you left her is in writing, dated, and specific. The signatory agreement from the credit union establishes the scope of her access. The statements show a clear pattern of unauthorized use that begins 8 days after you departed and continues through month 11. The total is significant. The tax exposure Farida identified is real and needs to be addressed, but it's addressable." She said she wanted to prepare 2 things. First, a formal demand letter to my mother citing the unauthorized transactions, the total amount, and a request for repayment within 30 days, along with an acknowledgement that the signatory access would be permanently revoked. Second, a correction filing to address the tax discrepancy that the unauthorized transactions had created, something she would coordinate with Farida to ensure both documents address the same set of facts. She said the demand letter could go out by the following Tuesday if I confirmed I wanted to proceed. I said yes. I walked out of Sanaa's office at 3:41 p.m. and stood in the lobby for a moment. The building had one of those lobbies with very high ceilings and a particular quality of cool indoor air that is distinct from the weather outside, and I stood in it for a few seconds doing nothing, and then I walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, and sat down, and ordered something and looked out the window at the street. I filed the IRS correction report that afternoon in coordination with Farida. She had prepared the filing and was waiting for my authorization. I sent it at 6:03 p.m. on a Thursday, sitting at a table near the window with the remains of a coffee I had stopped tasting 40 minutes earlier. The confirmation came through at 6:11 p.m. I saved it to the same folder as the statements and the instruction document and Farida's summary and looked at the folder for a moment, at the clean sequence of documents that told the whole story in order, and then I closed the laptop. The demand letter arrived at my mother's house the following Tuesday. Sanaa sent it by certified mail and also by email to an address I provided, so there would be no question of it not being received. My mother called me at 8:52 a.m., then at 9:04 a.m., then at 9:17 a.m. I was at my desk, and I watched the phone, and I did not pick up. At 9:31 a.m., she sent a text message. It said, "Leila, please call me. There has been a misunderstanding. Please." At 10:14 a.m., she sent another. "I can explain everything. It was not what it looks like. Please call me." At 11:45 a.m., "I only used it for necessities. You were gone, and things were difficult. I was going to tell you." I read all 3 messages, and I did not respond. I forwarded them to Sanaa at 12:03 p.m. with a note saying my mother had been in contact. My sister Rima called me that evening at 7:22 p.m. I answered because Rima was not part of what had happened and deserved to hear my side before she formed a position. She said our mother had called her in distress. She said she was not calling to take sides, that she wanted to understand. I told her what had happened, all of it, from the instruction document to the statements to Farida's summary to Sanaa's letter. I told her the total. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Rima said, "She told me she had borrowed some money from you and was going to pay it back." I said, "Borrowing would have required asking first." Rima said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry, Leila. I didn't know the scale of it. My younger sister Dina did not call me. She sent a text 4 days later that said our mother was very upset and hoped I would consider the family before doing anything irreversible." I read it once and set my phone face down on the counter and went to make dinner. My mother came to see me in person on a Saturday morning 11 days after the demand letter arrived. She did not call ahead. I opened the door and she was standing there in her winter coat with her handbag held in front of her with both hands, which was a posture I recognized as her formal posture, the one she adopted when she felt the need to conduct herself with particular carefulness. I let her in. I made tea because it was something to do with my hands. We sat at the kitchen table, and she began by saying that she had not intended for it to go so far. She said that the first few times she had used the card it had been genuine emergencies, a pharmacy bill, a utility that had come due, when she was short that month. She said she had told herself she would replace the money before I came back. She said that 1 month had become 2 and 2 had become 6, and she had kept moving the date in her mind of when she would address it, and then I had come home, and she had not been ready, and she had hoped I might not examine the statements too carefully. She stopped talking. She was looking at the table. I said, "Mom, you left the instruction document on your counter for 11 months. You knew exactly what I had said, and you did it anyway." She said, "I know." I said, 37 times. She said, very quietly, "I know." I said, "I'm not going to undo the legal process. The correction filing is done. The demand letter stands. Sanaa will work with you on a repayment schedule that is manageable given your situation, but the repayment is not negotiable. Neither is the account access. It's already been permanently revoked." She nodded. She did not argue. And in the absence of argument, I saw something I had not fully expected, which was not shame exactly, but something adjacent to it, the particular deflation of a person who has been hoping the story they told themselves would survive contact with the documented facts, and has just discovered it does not. Sanaa negotiated a repayment agreement the following week. My mother would repay $31,450.17 in monthly installments of $580 over a period of 4.5 years, with a signed acknowledgement that the funds had been taken without authorization. She signed it on a Tuesday afternoon in Sanaa's office. I was not present. Sanaa sent me the signed copy by email at 3:17 p.m., and I read it at my desk and saved it to the folder and closed the laptop and sat for a while in the quiet of my office. I want to tell you what has changed and what has not because I think honesty requires both. What has not changed is that my mother is my mother. I see her at family gatherings. I call on her birthday. The texture of those interactions is different now, more careful, more surface, and I do not know whether that will ease with time or whether this is simply what the relationship is now, a version of itself with something removed from it that will not grow back. I have stopped trying to predict it. I sit with what it is on the day that it is, and I do not ask it to be more than that. What has changed is that I no longer operate under the assumption that love and trustworthiness are the same thing. My mother loves me. I do not doubt that. But love, I have learned, is not a substitute for the specific kind of reliability that financial trust requires, and conflating the two is how I ended up with 37 unauthorized transactions and an 11-page document from my CPA and a correction filing with a federal agency. I loved her, and I trusted her, and those were two separate decisions, and only one of them turned out to be warranted. The business is fine. The correction filing resolved the tax discrepancy cleanly. The client retainers that continued during my absence were unaffected. Farida sent me a note after the filing was confirmed that said the books were clean, and we could close out the year normally, and I read that note sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with coffee and rain on the window, and I felt, for the first time in several weeks, the specific satisfaction of a problem that has been solved with the right tools in the right order. There is something I learned from this that I want to give you before I go because I think it is genuinely useful, and I wish someone had said it to me before any of this happened. Limited access is not the same as limited risk. When you give someone access to a financial account, Regardless of how clear your instructions are, and regardless of how much you trust them, you are extending them a form of power that operates in your absence. The instructions you leave are only as enforceable as the person receiving them chooses to make them. The only real protection is documentation, the instruction in writing, the authorization scope in writing, the statement review on your return. Not because you're suspicious, not because you expect the worst, but because documentation is the thing that turns your account of events into an account of record, and the difference between those two things is the difference between a conversation and a legal instrument. Keep the access narrow. Keep the documentation complete. And review the statements when you come home, even if you are tired, even if you think everything is fine. If you were in Leila's position, if you came home from 11 months abroad and found 37 unauthorized transactions in your business account and your mother's number in your recent calls, would you have called her that same Saturday before you called the attorney? Or would you have done exactly what Leila did, built the full record first, and let the documents speak before you did?